Introduce myself. My name is Peter Palmer. I'm the Vice President of the Gimli Glider Museum, and I'll be here this evening. And I just want to welcome all of you to this fundraising event. It's such an important event for the museum. Something we hold annually, and I recognize many faces in here that have been here for multiple years. Thank you so much for continuing your support. It means a lot to us. But before we get started, I'd like to recognize that this event is taking place on Treaty 1 territory, and that the land in which we gather is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, including the Cree, the Ojibwe Cree, the Dakota, the Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Red Métis. Now, we have a great program lined up for you tonight, and a number of special guests, and I'll be introducing them to you soon. However, before we do so, I just want you to know that the Gimli Glider is a very highly recognized event, and if you really did a Google search, you'll find out that the Gimli Glider event is one of the top 3 aviation emergency landing events in the world, based on modern day aviation. And as a matter of interest, I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about that. The first event was actually, we all know about that, that's the Miracle of the Hudson. That's the Airways Flight 1549 from 2009. What happened there, bird strikes disabled both engines shortly after the takeoff. And the aircraft glided about 3.5 minutes before landing in the Hudson River. All 155 people aboard survived. The second event is our Gimli Glider event, Air Canada Flight 143 in 1983. As you're all aware, the aircraft ran out of fuel at 41,000 feet due to a metric conversion failure. The aircraft glided for 17 minutes, imagine that, before landing at the decommissioned runway at the Gimli Airport. All 69 people aboard survived. And the third event was the Chikarna incident. That was British Airways Flight 9 in 1982. The aircraft flew through volcanic ash, causing all 4 engines to flame out before leaving it with no power or visibility. The aircraft glided for 15 minutes before being restarted. All 263 passengers on board survived. So hopefully, by better understanding the true magnitude of the successful emergency aviation landing that took place here in Gimli 43 years ago to this day, you'll appreciate why it was so important to establish the Gimli Glider Museum so that this worldwide recognized historical aviation event would be preserved for decades to come in order to educate, enlighten, and even entertain those that come to visit the exhibit, which since its opening in 2017 has become one of the top 3 visitor attractions of Gimli. Google it to find out. So keeping that in mind, this is my segue to welcome our first guest, Angela Cassi. She's the interim president and CEO of Chudd, Manitoba, to bring greetings on behalf of that organization. So please welcome Angela.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and it's my pleasure to be here today on behalf of the entire team at Chudd, Manitoba. It's been great to sit with His Worship the Mayor and talk a little bit about the opportunity here in the city, Member of Parliament Bezan, retired members of City Council, but also Captains McKinnon and Pearson. It's a pleasure to meet you and also to hear your story. When we talk about tourism, very often we talk about the importance of tourism from an economic perspective. Tourism brings around $1.89 billion to the province of Manitoba every year. It's a huge economic driver, and the tax revenue that comes from that helps build our roads, builds our hospitals, and also contributes to the vitality of our communities in a lot of different ways. And that's an important part of the story. But tourism is so much more than that. When you decide on a family vacation, you dream about it, you talk about it with your family, you negotiate who gets to go where, when, and then you start saving those pennies. You start saving, well, I guess not pennies anymore. Maybe we start by dimes, or maybe you already have to start with the toonie these days. But you make that investment. And at the end of the day, the reason people travel isn't because of the economic driver that tourism is. It's a way to connect, it's a way to create memories, and it's a way to learn about the world and about others. And I think that's part of why working with the Gimli Glider Museum has been so exciting. And my predecessor, Colin Ferguson, who retired at the end of June, we shared an office for the last 3 years. And I always know when we talk to Barb, he'd come back super excited, and he'd be telling me about it. And Angela, have you tried landing a plane? And do you understand how significant it is? But that's the power of story. When you share your stories with other people, it becomes part of their story. And it becomes something that they go back home and share their excitement and their enthusiasm. But what's also important behind the story of the Gimli Glider Museum is all the passionate people who are ensuring that we can continue to hear the story. And it's thanks to the volunteers who have dedicated years and hours that we're able to be here. And that human element is part of the tourism experience as well. You can have an amazing experience, but it's that warm welcome when you walk through the door, that passion and enthusiasm, that makes the difference. And so we're so pleased to continue partnering to highlight not only the community of Gimli and the beautiful resources and what a fitting place to be in, where you can see that expanse of water, the incredible experiences people can have in the Gimli Glider Museum, and excited to see it grow and develop in the days to come. But ultimately, it's about the people in this room and the people in the community that leave that lasting impression on visitors who come here and who go home with that story of how they were touched by someone who shared their story and took the time to share that passion. So thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today, and look forward to continued collaboration in the years to come.
Thank you, Angela. The Gimli Glider Museum is both appreciative and very supportive of the great work that Travel Manitoba does to promote the numerous attractions and events that take place in this great province. At this time, I'd like to welcome our next guest, James Bezan, whose dedication and commitment as the Member of Parliament for the riding of Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman since 2004 has been outstanding. James. Thank you very much, Peter. Don't want to hurt anybody's ears, or is that just my hearing aids?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed a pleasure to be able to join all of you here to really continue to raise funds and awareness of the great work of the Gimli Glider Museum. This exhibit is a labor of love that Barb has taken on and has driven so hard to make sure that we preserve this piece of Gimli history. And it's always wonderful to see Captain Bob Pearson here and making sure that you're always part of this amazing story. Look at your courage, your way that you were able to remember that this runway existed and utilize that to protect your passengers. And it's a story that's worth telling over and over again. It's always great to see Pearl joining here as well. So I can tell you that this is a fundraiser. It is important that we continue to raise dollars to support the ongoing operations of the Gimli Glider exhibit. This museum, the work that's happening now with the park and the cockpit, preserving that history is going to ensure that that story is always here for everyone that visits Gimli. This community is unique to start with. But the more attractions that we have, the more reasons that people want to come to town, the entire community, the entire region benefits. Barb was sharing with me earlier that people from around the world are coming to Gimli because of the glider exhibit, because of the story that Captain Bob is so critically part of. and that we need to ensure that the artifacts, that amazing story is told to everyone that comes to visit, and that they can walk away feeling the incredible courage, the skill, and the commitment to the flight that Captain Bob and his crew showed to every single passenger who's on that plane, including Pearl. So that story gets harder to tell as time goes on. So by each and every one of you being here, is helping ensure that Gimli Glider exhibit is there for everyone that comes to call Gimli in their vacations and their travels, and for those of us that call Gimli home. So on behalf of all my colleagues in Parliament, on behalf of the great people of Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman, I have to say thank you to Barb, your board, your directors, the incredible volunteers who put so much time into ensuring that the exhibit is open day in and day out, and that the artifacts are being protected, and the exhibit is continually built upon. I want to thank the province of Manitoba, Selkirk, Manitoba, for their commitment and support, and know that we need to do even more, and that I'll be working along with my colleagues like Derek Johnson to ensure that we can find a few extra dollars to ensure that the commitment and the investment in our history is always there for us. I always say that museums are so important. We've got the Icelandic Museum here as well. If we really want to understand who we are, we have to protect our history. Because by knowing our history, then we understand how we got to where we are, and we can plan better for the future. And so every museum that we have throughout the Interlake, throughout the province, is critical to knowing who we are as Interlakers, as Manitobans, and as Canadians. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James. Your ongoing support of the Gimli Glider Museum is very much appreciated. Now here to provide greetings on behalf of the RM of Gimli, please welcome our Mayor, Kevin Chudd.
Good evening, everyone. It is indeed an honor and privilege to be here this evening. I'm accompanied here tonight with our full council, Councillor Richard Petrowski, Councillor Sora Paulson, and Councillor Kurt Reichert, along with our Director of Operations of Public Reserve, Ron. Our community is proud to support the museum, President Barr. Thank you and your team, Vice President Peter, for all the work, your team, your volunteers, sponsors, for everything you've done over the years. And, you know, there's been some tough going for them in many ways. Is there a bit of an echo here? Is that better now? Step back a bit. Over the years, it's really come to its own and expanded with the display site. And there's one person that keeps coming here year after year. And I'm going to talk about him for a moment, because the Gimli Glider wouldn't be the Gimli Glider, and we would not be here today celebrating the success and safety of a true Canadian aviation hero, Captain Bob Pearson. As a lifelong resident of Gimli, I had the pleasure of going to the air base, as we called it, the industrial park, the airport, when I heard that a plane had crashed. We all thought it was a Cessna aircraft. As we got closer, we saw this Air Canada airplane. It was unbelievable. I got right up to it at that time with the fire department. Gary McGregor, had retired as fire chief, years of service beyond the call of duty. He was there on site before anyone else, helping everyone off the plane. Then he said, guys, get back, you can't be around here. So I was one of them that was fairly close, saw it, and I left them. I got to experience that. Also had the opportunity to see the airplane when they were doing their repairs. And then the morning that it flew out of Gimli, early morning, as an early riser, I heard some noise, and at first I didn't know what it was. The airplane flew to the north, banked to the west, and flew to Winnipeg. So I was privileged to see that. On another occasion, I flew from Winnipeg to Minneapolis, and sitting right beside me, Maurice Quintel, first officer. Boy, did him and I have a good conversation. Unbelievable to be blessed with that. And to be here tonight with another very important person that on my first time around on council, because I was on council for 17 years, off for 17 and back, is one of my mentor and great chairman of council today, Ray Sigurdsson. We were we're the only two living members of the municipal council when the road naming took place at the industrial park. And I was proud to be part of that. Our CAO was Chris Fulsher. Ray and I were on council, and it was unanimous. And one of the gentlemen who was on council, his son is a councillor now, and that is Richard Petrowski. His father, Edward, was a councillor. On another note, when I was in Florida, at Disney World, it was raining. I went back to the hotel room. I put the TV on. What was playing? Free Fall. I'm watching William Devane. Oh my goodness, that's the Gimli Glider. So later that evening in the Magic Kingdom, I was sitting down. The conversation was incredible about the Gimli Glider. So right off the hop, it's been very extra special for the community in so many ways. And last year, and that's the humility and humble, gracious nature of Captain Bob. He came here, and actually I'm going to come back to this right away, because the other thing that I had the privilege of going was to Winnipeg to the Fort Garry Hotel with my grandfather to watch him be cross-examined on what took place. What he went through was really unbelievable and should not have happened. But out of that, it's probably good that it did, Bob, because the hero that you are today makes it a lot meaningful because of his gracious nature, the way he defended what he did, and the way he looked after the people on that plane is another reason why this gentleman should be in the Hall of Fame of Aviation. It's in Calgary. That means we are the third connection. Then last summer, because he's here all the time, he said, we're going to have to make him an honorary Viking. We have pilot, but he's also an honorary Viking. And we had a dinner with him, and in typical fashion with his nature, we're talking, and after the dinner, and the next day he tells us he really enjoyed the dinner because that day, Barb was there, Peter was there, and it was his 90th birthday. He came to Gimli, Manitoba on his 90th birthday.
And we got to dance
And you got to dance with him. And the other member, and again today we also have Jocelyn Barlow. Her husband was on town council when that occurred. So it's incredible to have all these ties, but at the same time to have everyone here in celebration for the Gimli Glider Museum, and they have some exciting newfound opportunities. And with the area that has now been secured for them, the best is yet to come. The future is bright. The fundraising will continue, but the legacy will last forever. Please join me in an appreciation round of applause for the Gimli Glider, the team, the captain, and everybody involved with it. Thank you very much.
I'm assuming he's finished. Thank you, Kevin, and I want to thank all council for their support of the Gimli Glider Museum. It's very much appreciated. Now, at this time, I'd like to introduce several special guests who are here with us tonight. So when I call your name, if you could please stand. So let's give an official warm welcome to Air Canada's retired captain, Pearson. Next up, please welcome Pearl Young, who was a passenger on Air Canada Flight 143 that successfully landed on July 27, 1983. Also here with us tonight, please welcome Chuck McKinnon. I know you're sitting over there. He was the Air Canada pilot who flew passengers from Flight 143, that being the Gimli Glider, on July 23, 1983, to Edmonton the next day. Amazing, so amazing. Next up, to provide greetings on behalf of the Gimli Glider Museum, is the individual who had the vision and drive to create the museum in order to preserve one of the top 3 aviation emergency landing events in the world that I mentioned earlier on. And since then, has become one of the top 3 attractions of Gimli. So please welcome the founder of the Gimli Glider Museum, Barbara.
You hear my name a lot. I've just had the smarts to pick the right people to work side by side with me. And before I go any further, choose Gwen, Mel, Emery, Steve Bannister, don't forget Peter Bourbon, Everett has just joined us. Who am I missing? I've got the names here somewhere. Could you stand? These people have given as much or more time as I have. So am I missing? Stand up. Board members that are here, Dave Tustin, Gordon Hoover, Jeff Arneson, can you stand? I worked on the seawall. I worked on the seawall, painting for hours up there, and the question was constant. Where's the statue? Where's the runway? Where's the exhibit? And when I received a phone call out of BC that the plane that had been sold was going to be taken apart, the gentleman said to me, so your name keeps coming up. You want to do something about it. How much money does your committee have? And I said, what committee? We talked for an hour and we gained a trust in each other. He was quite high up in Air Canada and he was here. in Winnipeg when this happened. And he knew Pearl John's husband, Rick John, who was the third person in the cockpit. And so when he told me what was going to happen with the plane being sold off around the world, my heart sank. And he said, so he would understand the relevance of this call. And I said, I do. And he said, so what do you think? And I said, I'll get up there and I'll try. And the first person I called was Gwen, who had worked so hard with me side by side at the Gimli Art Club. And she said to me, you're crazy, but let's try. And here we are. Here we are. Anyway, so yeah, it's not me. Believe me, they know a lot more than I do, these people, about aviation, and it couldn't operate without them. I could disappear and that would be fine, because they know more. Okay. Good evening. There's some of you that are repetitive to visitors, and it's nice to see you here. It's comforting that you come back, because it means you had a good time last year. So we appreciate your presence and support of Gimli history. For those guests that are here for the first time, we hope you go depart feeling that you have enjoyed learning even more about the world-famous Gimli landing. We're hopeful you will understand why the volunteer staff at the museum is so committed to providing our story to the global visitors coming not only to our town but our province. Last June was a benchmark month for the continued focus and development of the glider history. From the beginning of this journey, some 13 years ago, the cockpit was our focus for the return to Canada. This is the critical area of the famous aircraft where Captain Bob and co-pilot Maurice Quintel worked to successfully save lives in the never-before-performed side-slip landing of a passenger airliner in distress. As Bob so genuinely referred to the cockpit section upon its return to Canada across the Manitoba border, my office has come home. And those of us that were present there will never forget him patting it on the side and saying, my office has come home. Responsible for the return of the cockpit is one of our board members and a dedicated, valued, and skilled Air Canada retired staff member. Glenn Hooper, stand up again for me, please. When I talk about value, Glenn went down and he picked up the cockpit and he drove it back. And we're in constant contact, making sure that things are going well. And he told me some of the interesting stories when he would pull in for gas. People thought it was a space shuttle. He had one police officer actually guess what it was, not the Gimli Glider, but he said, hey, that's a cockpit, to which Glenn replied to him, well, I'm glad the state has hired an intelligent police officer. Okay. Important in the development of this history as it unfolds. Several months ago, I was approached with an offer by a very well-regarded and globally known personality in the aviation sphere of all things Hollywood and the visual recreation of historic events for those that are fantasized for film and movie world. Doug Scroggins of Scroggins Aviation became aware of our need for 6 windows to be recovered for installation into the cockpit. The cost of window recovery was enormous and concerning that we could manage to find 6 suitable windows to replace the ones that were sold off for many thousands of dollars. Doug spoke to me about his respect and admiration for what Bob Pearson had done to safely land that airliner, about it being a #1 aviation story, and asking, could he help our volunteer efforts to do the restoration? I immediately had minutes of relief, more than I'd had in years of working with the history. To have that kind of expenditure covered cannot be expressed in a simple thank you. Each singular window was manufactured in 1983 for $20,000 a piece. To recover them as non-certifiable on the second or third hand market was still in the thousands each window US dollars plus tariffs and GST. This phone call had just taken away a whole lot of work and searching time for our team. Once again, Glenn, on short notice, got in a vehicle, jumped into the vehicle, headed south in the immense heat to Las Vegas in the Mojave Boneyard, and helped remove windows. He brought them back for installation. We were in constant contact and followed his every mile as best we could, of sleeping in the car if necessary with our precious cargo. Doug Scroggins has told us he wants to come to Gimli, and once we get a better idea of when the cockpit will be installed at the commemorative park, which was so kindly donated by the province, the land, and the Art Council, we will be personally able to thank him for doing what he's done with donating these windows for us. I leave you with this one thought. Google Scroggins Aviation, and you will understand the importance of this donation from a man of this stature. This is the third American company that has come forward to give us a tremendous amount of support to operate this museum. Every one of them saying this is the #1 story out there. In closing, to update you, we are still in the restoration process of the cockpit. The next work to begin with approval from an engineering company on the design that we come together on. And fundraising for that next stage will be continuous and ongoing. We did the best we could in our plans to open the exhibit to make sure that the quality that this history deserved, and we're going to do the same with the commemorative park, and it will become a world draw. So that's pretty much it for what I have to say. I appreciate you coming here, and any effort or any thoughts you give to supporting the continued effort is always going to be appreciated. More details on that can be had by talking to any one of us on the team. And yeah, so in closing, thank you again for coming and enjoying the evening. And just follow our developments on our website and Facebook. And I think when you told me what, we had about 200 hits yesterday? Yeah, or Amory, yeah, you said it. We had 200 hits yesterday, and that was all about what time would Captain Ball be there to meet the public? Door opened this morning and we were inundated. I had to ask the doors to be closed for fire regulations. So that's the lure of this story and the flow of the story. And yeah, they're coming from all over the world. And I'm going to deviate with one story here. One afternoon, Mal was there for this. We had Pakistani, quite high up executive, right? He had come to see Korea, Brazil, and Australia, all Asian people at one time in there. They left and went for lunch together when I introduced them all to each other. They were shocked at the fact, and that's not uncommon. So yeah, it's a good place to come and see. And the young kids, teaching them is one of our main things. And I've had school teachers say to me, "Why isn't this on the curriculum?" And I say to them, "That's not my job, that's yours." Thank you.
Thank you, Barb. So you heard the cockpit windows coming back. You heard the cockpit coming back from the States. Guess what? No tariffs. Had to say that.
That's saved. Yay.
It's time now for me to introduce our guest speaker, Clint Ward. I briefly met with Clint yesterday, and he informed me that he spent 50 years flying aircrafts, never had to buy a single gallon of fuel. Clint, we could have used a few thousand liters of that fuel on July 23rd. I can tell you that. Clint also informed me that he spent some time here at RCF Station Gimli in 1951 and 1952. Guess what? He also has an Icelandic connection. It'll be interesting to hear a bit more about that and much more. But that's not all. Clint is also an author and a playwright. He also must have some good genes because he's still highly active at the incredible age of 94. A little earlier on today, actually, Clint and I, we did a little sound check here, and I was over there and I said, Clint, you really sound really good. He said, well, I'm still learning. I said, well, I'll probably learn about 95. So please join me in welcoming Clint Ward.
Can everybody hear me? Yeah, thanks, Peter. There's been so much stolen from what I was going to say in the last 30 minutes that I think I'm going to try and edit on the spot a bit. I was reminded that I lost something already. Oh, it's okay, it's just a cable. I did turn off my phone because I'm always worried about it going off while I'm talking. I did hear one cell phone go off. But if anybody still has the cell phone on, it'd be a good idea to turn it off. But it did remind me of a story that happened to me in maybe a couple of years ago. I was interviewing in a long program a filmmaker in a series we had in Hudson, Quebec called In Conversation With. And he was a filmmaker that had just finished a film about Iceland and Greenland. And in the interview, we got talking about Icelandic people and how they ended up in Gimli. And at that point, my phone rang. And guess who was on the phone? Bobby Pearson. So I just put the mic up against the phone, and the gentleman, the filmmaker, thought that I'd set that up. That's impossible to set up. So thanks, Bob, for that name. I do have to talk about on all the other days because Bart put it in the introduction. Right now, I am on a second life. I did, in about 2015, have a death dream. And I survived sepsis, which is at my age 20 to 30% survival rate. So now I'm on the second life, and that's where the writing, the playwriting, etc. took place. The playwriting is mostly about pilots. I've dedicated myself to coming up with a trilogy of plays about women aviators in the Second World War. The first was about the women in England and the ATA. The second one was about the women in France. And the third one, yet to be written. It's in my head, it's not on paper yet. It's about the Americans. The Russian one is very interesting. How many of you have not heard about the Night Witches? Good, I can talk about it a bit. This is about all the women pilots in the Second World War were ferry pilots. They weren't engaged with the enemy, except in Russia. In Russia, they worked hand-to-hand and even terms with the men, both their own men and the enemy. And there was one regiment that was all women. Pilots, navigators, bomb loaders, mechanics, administration, everything. The youngest was 17, the oldest 26. They spent 1,100 days as volunteers in service of their country. They followed the front. They never flew out of airports. They flew out of fields. They didn't have sanitary convenience. A lot may not have been showers, toilets, whatever. They had lice inspections, but they created a lot of damage. They were given rickety 20s canvas and wooden airplanes that were used for crop spraying. They had no defense at all, so they flew at night. And they would come into the target, shut off the engine, and glide in, drop the bombs, and they go back, get some more bombs, and do it again. They did 6 to 8 to 10 turns a night to do that. And they took the sleep away from the Germans. That's what they did. It was a wonderful story about these women. And that was my second play called The Night Witch because it was about one of them. And I've also written several other books, and the one that was in the title here was my memoir on all the other days. Many people thought that on all the other days meant what I did on my days off as a pilot. But it was not that at all. It was based upon something very specific. To write, Bart may not understand this because he doesn't do it. Perhaps I need a title to start writing. I know an editor can change the title, but that's how I start. And I needed a title for my memoir. And All the Other Days, On All the Other Days, is based on the Schultz cartoon. It's Charlie Brown sitting on a dock with Snoopy, looking out at the water. Charlie says, "Someday we will all die, Snoopy." Snoopy says, "True, but on all the other days we will not." That's very specific. I did try to get the rights to use that cartoon as an illustration in the book. I got half the rights. That was for the drawing. But that text is not owned by Schultz, it's owned by somebody else. So I couldn't get the complete rights, and I just put it in verbally. So I'm going to share some of the stories that were in that book based on aviation, because I was an aviator before I was given the gift of my second life. And my connection with Gimli is my wife and the mother of my children was born in Flin Flon, Manitoba, is Icelandic. So my children are half Icelandic. The first time I ever set my hands on an airplane's controls was in Gimli, Manitoba. As I was there as a gift from Canada, which was called a short service commission, where we got in as we were paid to learn to fly an airplane. And then we only had to give 6 years of service to a reserve squadron somewhere in Canada. My squadron was in Saskatoon, 406, and they sponsored me for this wonderful, wonderful training. My first instructor was a Brit, and his name was Johnson, and he was a veteran Spitfire pilot. He knew one sentence to give me, and that was, "I have control." So I fought with him for 15 hours. I learned very little. And then on 1952, on January 2, another instructor appeared. His name was Desmain. And he took me for the day, and then he carried on with me right to the time when I got my wings. There was a secret involved with that substitution of instructor, and I didn't learn the answer to that until 40 years later. After I finished in Gimli, I did go back home to Saskatoon. I tried university. On weekends, I flew the B-25 Mitchell, or 6 Squadron's airplane. And then I got very bored with university and applied to Trans-Canada Airlines and was accepted with them. My first base, permanent base in TCA, was in Calgary, where I spent my time for a couple of years going up on the foothills program, which was Edmonton, Calgary, Lethbridge, Calgary, Edmonton, Lethbridge, Calgary. And that went on for several years, but on weekends, I transferred to 401 Squadron and got to fly the Mustang, which was one of the greatest airplanes of the Second World War, and it was very exciting to fly that airplane. Then I went back to Montreal, and I got on the North Star. And one of the things on the North Star, which was a bit strange to me, was flying into the Maritimes. And we called that the swamp. We called it the swamp lovingly because of the varied weather we had there. Drizzle, rain, fog, a lot of fog, icy runways, snow, etc. It was one of the greatest master classes in flying in the entire world. If you could fly the Maritimes of Canada, you could fly anywhere. My next airplane after the North Star was the Super Connie. And I was the first officer. It was my second flight as the first officer. Was on a unique flight. It was the inaugural flight. It was called Pacific Mercury, the first non-stop flight between Toronto and Vancouver. And that was on the Connie. And after the Super Constellation, I took training on the Viscount to become captain. The Viscount is a British airplane. This is an aviation question for those of you who are pilots. Why didn't the Brits invent television? Because they couldn't find a way to make it leak oil. Well, there are a few aviators in the room. That's a good one. So, on the Viscount, one of the first adventures I had was a landing in Fredericton, New Brunswick at night. There's no tower there. So we called the radio range operator to turn on the runway lights, which he did. My landing was maybe one of the best and smoothest landings I've ever done. But when I got to the gate, well, there was no gate then, it was at the ramp where they parked us. A mechanic came on board and said, "Captain, you better have a look underneath your airplane." I went outside. Wow, pitch black on the back of this airplane because the runway had been closed and it had just been freshly tarred. So it must have taken those mechanics and a 45-gallon drum of Barsol while we slept in the hotel to clean it up. But soon after that, they established a tower in Fredericton. Then after the Viscount, I got into the jet age. And there's one story about the Super Connie. Actually, there's two. I can go back to that because one was a lesson, a very important lesson for a pilot to have, I think. I was flying as the reserve extra pilot on the transatlantic service. And the captain was in the bunk. I was in the left seat. The first officer was in the right seat. We were in cloud. We were icing off. We called Gander ATC to see if we could get a clearance. We couldn't reach them. Eventually the captain woke up and came up front. He said, "What's going on?" We said, "Well, we're in cloud, but we can't get a clearance to get up." He said, "F the clearance." Throttles on, and we got out of there. He said, "Get this airplane up." And that lesson was our basic responsibility was the safety of that airplane. And we had to do something even without the clearance. And that was the lesson I learned on the Super Connie. And one night in Gander, walking to the airplane, I looked at it and I said, "This is the biggest airplane I've ever seen. They can't make airplanes bigger than this." Little did I know that this was the end of propeller and that jet age was dawning and it would soon be there. So now I'm on the Viscount as the captain. And then I moved to the DC-9. That was my introduction to jets. And then after that, there was the 727. And I was on one of the initial courses as Bob was. We both had the same instructor on that airplane. It was a wonderful airplane. It was exciting to be in the first weeks and months of the newest airplane in the fleet. A couple of funny things happened to me on that airplane. I'll share this one with you. As I got on the airplane, I had to turn the volume to where it was comfortable. And each subsequent flight, I was turning it up a little higher. And eventually, I got it to where I couldn't turn it up anymore. And I thought, oh, my career is over. It's a hearing loss. But I went to the clinic, and the doctor looked in my ears and said, they're full of wax. So he pumped the wax out. I went home, and oh my God, it itched. It was itchy. I couldn't get my finger in there. I couldn't do anything. But I found in the medicine cabinet a tube of ointment for an anal itch. So I put it in my ear, and the itching disappeared, and my face went up like a basketball. Anyway, I told that story one day to a flight attendant, and she said, "Oh, I always knew our pilots didn't know their ass from their ears." Another 727 flight I did was Toronto to Bermuda and return. And this really, these are all true stories, but it was a clear day. We got up to our cruising altitude, and coming up to New York City, I knew our passengers wouldn't see Manhattan because it was right below the airplane. So I called up air traffic control and said, "Can we just go to the west a bit?" They said that was okay. And then I could turn left to go back to course, and there would be New York, Manhattan, right under the airplane. And so I did that. And we turned left, and the view was absolutely stunning of Manhattan and Long Island Sound. And then we got changed to another ATC frequency. And the new guy said, "Air Canada, what are you doing up there?" I said, "Well, I'm showing my passengers your city." He said, "Oh, I thought you were looking for the Stanley Cup. It's up here in Long Island." I am editing, so just give me a second here to get back on track a bit. So that was the 727, and the next airplane after that was, there was a yearly way we could bid on whatever airplane we wanted to train on. And I always, as a personal joke, bid on the 747 because I didn't think I ever would have the seniority to get on the airplane that everybody wanted to be on. And I was going to a simulator exercise with the chief pilot of the 727, and he said, "I'm going to go up and look at the list because it just closed." He went up and looked at it and came back and he said to me, "Ward, you screwed up. You're on the 47. So that opened 12 years of my career. The last 12 years, I was lucky to get on that magnificent airplane for the last 12 years of my career. It reminds me there was a CBC program I had heard about that time, talking about man or humans and their history of tools. You know, you could go back to where you could use a brush or something with a hole in it, and you could suck things out of ant holes and stuff like that, and then progress through the wheel and everything else. And it got to the end result, the most incredible bit of using a tool that had happened up to that time. And that was the control wheel on the 747, that one person could sit there and control this magnificent airplane that weighed up to 800,000 pounds. It just was something else. And the 747, it was so easy to land it. If you had 30 feet, raise the nose 5 degrees, it landed itself. And if it was a wet runway, sometimes you didn't even know you were on the ground until the wheels spun up and the speed brake lever would come in on the side pedestal, and you knew you were on the ground. That's how easy it was. Bob and I have discussed this, and we both agreed on that wet runway landing and how good it is. I'm trying to think of, let me go to the 747. Here we are. And one flight from London to Toronto, when I went down to the aircraft, there was a lot of security people around. I don't know why they were there, I hadn't been told. but apparently it was because William and Harry were on board. They were on the way to Toronto where their parents, Princess Di and Prince Charles, were. So naturally, I invited them up to the cockpit, something you cannot do today. Bob and I, if we go, we can't get into the cockpit of an airplane, and it's locked up there. Anyway, I invited them up, and then I invited William up for the landing. Several weeks later, a flight attendant said to me, Oscar Peterson's on board. I said, oh, see if he'd like to come up for the landing. And he came up as we started descent. And you know, it was more of a thrill to have Oscar behind me than the future King of England. Oscar was a great Canadian. I'm going to go into my script now. My last flight in an almost 40 years, in an almost 40-year run that covered the golden age of aviation was to Paris. I wanted to take Des Main, that second instructor, with me. I was able through government records to connect to Des, and I invited him to come with me, and he said okay. So I picked him up at the airport, took him to my house, fed him, and just before we were going to bed, and we were going to Paris the next day, I said, Des, let me have a look at your passport. And he said, what's that? I said, Des, we need a passport. He said, well, I always just use my Air Force ID. Well, you're not in the Air Force anymore, Des. So call your wife and get her to fax us your birth certificate. He said, well, I don't have one of those either. I'm a naturalized citizen. So the next morning at 9 a.m., he and I got out. We found 2 civil servants who supported my idea of taking my original instructor to Paris. And by 3 in the afternoon, we had proved his citizenship and we had a temporary passport. Anyway, when we got home 2 days later, and you know, he hadn't left the cockpit hardly the whole time. It was a wonderful there and back. We had a bit of a party. And he took me aside and he gave me the 40-year secret. He said, when I came to that flight on January 2nd, it was to corroborate the first instructor saying that you should be CT'd. That meant fired, get out, go home, whatever, you're a failure. But I recognized something and carried on. I also got the highest flying marks at the end of the course. So after almost getting fired, but getting the highest marks, maybe shifted some of their reasoning and how they do things in the RCAF. My last landing in Toronto was a bittersweet experience, of course, because I knew when we got to the gate, that would be the end of something that I really, really loved. And I can say in my career that I was never, in the time that I flew commercially, tested in real time. No engine fires, nothing that was serious. But there is, of course, as you all know, one person in this room that faced a maximum test. Bob, I'm going to ask you to stand. You deserve even one more round of applause. It is my personal opinion that any captain in Air Canada could have pulled off what Sully Sullenberger did. The Gimli Glider was a much more complicated action, and possibly only one pilot could pull that off. And that pilot was on the airplane that day. His using the side slide You lose altitude and speed on final to Gimli. It's a trick I didn't have. I was never taught that technique, that maneuver. So I've always been, what's the right word, Bob? How I view what you did and how we talk about it. I've never lost that feeling. So in 2015, I nominated Bob and Maurice for admittance to Canada's Hall of Fame. And so far, that's hollow applause. It's not happened. In all those years, the first excuse was from them, from the Hall of Fame. Well, it's a one-off thing, and we want people who have made a long-term contribution to aviation, Max Ward, McGregor, whatever. And they wouldn't, even though we tried to convince them that the entire aviation world were modifying their syllabus to cover this, they didn't buy into that. So then I put a motion forward at the Canadian Aviation Historic Society, AGM, that their president go to the president of the Hall of Fame and suggest that they come up with another category to cover something like the Gimli Glider. It took about 5 years or so, and they finally did that. And it was released last year. Last year, the board itself picked 4 items. The Gimli Glider was one, and selected something else. So we've nominated them again, Bob and Maurice again this coming year. And so that result will come out in September sometime. My personal feeling is, and I have a couple of good politicians here right now, that if it fails, that we should have some kind of a revolution, maybe led by the Gimli Museum. So not, as you mentioned, Peter, at the start, if you go to Wikipedia, if you go to anywhere on the, ask the website, you'll get that top 3, and it's always there. How can you justify that it's not in Hall of Fame?
You got that.
About that name. How can you justify it's not there?
That's right.
Yeah. So, do your work in Parliament, do your work in the local affair, do your work in the government of Manitoba. Let's see what we can do. But wait till September, just in case. Who knows? So, I'm going to leave you with one last story. I don't like that, because you didn't like it either. But there's one last story that is in my book. And by the way, my book on All the Other Days is full of stories other than flying. As a matter of fact, one I missed, which I told Bud, there was going to be a football story in my remarks tonight. I'll have to go back to that. One of the ways that I got through life was lessons I learned by playing football in high school. We had a team, certainly not the best, but it was a team. And on one of our games, well, we had a very, very competitive coach. His name was Clarence Garvey. He wanted to win everything. On one of the games, our #1 receiver was tackled. We were wearing old canvas football pants, and they got ripped almost off. He had to come to the bench. He was finished. And the coach marched up and down in front of the bench, and he stopped in front of the 3rd string end. Mind you, this gentleman would someday be the Governor General of Canada, but he was not as good as Roy Phillips, our #1 receiver. Anyway, the coach, our win-it-all-toss coach, stopped in front of him and said, "Now, Titian, get behind the fence, take off your pants and give it to Phillips." Ray loved that story. I'm sure that Ray and I learned a lot of lessons from that coach. So I'm going to leave you with one story that is only partially aviation connected. It's a dear friend of mine, an ex-flight attendant. She was, God, I can hardly believe this, 47 years as a flight attendant. But earlier in her career, with the back-end crew, she was flying with the captain who came from the Imperial Airways and Trans-Canada Airlines through that, becoming Air Canada. Flew with leather gloves, and he had a bad habit that under the cabin crew, he would not talk to the flight attendants. He would say to the first officer, tell her I want a coffee. Anyway, this dear friend of mine, 47 years there, she's a dear friend of mine who I'm living with now. So I'm sure this is a true story by the way she treats me sometimes. Don't tell her I said that. She came up to the front and she was standing there and the captain said to the first officer, tell her I want my meal. So she went back to the galley. She came back with the meal. She held it over his lap and turned it upside down. And then she turned the thing up over and she said, tell him I'm sorry, and walked out. So I'm going to give you one last quote from the book. Remember, there's quotes if you ever get to look at the book. Every chapter has a quote, and this is the last one. I don't know which chapter, but it's there. And let's get one thing straight. There's a big difference between a pilot and an aviator. One is a technician, the other is an artist in love with flight. E.B. Jettison. Thank you.
Thank you. That was so nice. That was incredible. We're going to take a few minutes to maybe sort of have a Q&A. You know, I think we have time for 2 or 3 questions. And if I could ask Bob to come up just for a second. We're going to do a Q&A. Just come over here. And I know you're taking a rest, but it might be a question for Clint as well. Yeah, okay. I have a second mic here, so if there's somebody that wants to ask a question, if I guess that's, you know, just put your hand up and I'll come over there with the mic so that everybody can hear the question.
Look at close so we can get a photo.
Anybody have a question? This is your chance to ask.
Hey guys. There you go.
This is your chance. This is your chance to
Still bundles. One more. Sorry.
Does anybody have any questions you want to ask Bob or Clint? I guess they must have sounded like
I would like to know how many feet you were able to sidestep that way.
Sidestep.
When you sidestep.
how much?
Sidestep.
How many feet you were able to drop?
I know the answer to that. You better give me the same answer.
I don't know the answer. Clint thinks he knows the answer, but I don't. No, you know, it'd be just a guess because at that stage of the approach, I wasn't looking at the instruments. It was just all instinctive. And it was just by feel. And there was just no time to look at the old 4 World War II instruments that we had. There was no benefit in looking at them. So I'm not sure, but several hundred feet. We, as I recall, we were about 6 miles back when I called for the Morris to put extend the landing gear. And he selected the normal hydraulic selector, put it from off to down, and we heard nothing. So he comes to the emergency handbook that is carried on all aircraft, and under the landing gear section, there was no procedure for emergency extension of the gear. Brand new airplane, and so. I'm used to beating around the bush. I'm on a day off. Yeah, so to the point I'm making is that going through all this, I want to drag from the wheels to help slow the airplane down and lose altitude. And as a result of not having trained on the emergency extension landing gear, because we trained on a 3-pilot simulator instead of the 2-pilot version that Air Canada ended up with, and procedures were, and training was to be honest, slipshod. It was so because of that, we ended up too high and too fast. So from then on, it was, and the speed breaks. Every glider, there's only 2 types of airplanes: gliders and powered gliders. They all now have speed breaks. We didn't on that flight because we lost our hydraulics. And so the only way the system I used was to use the side of the fuselage as a big speed brake. And of course, instruments were of no use. It was strictly hands and feet, which I should probably, I know I'm getting off topic. My last, a little bit. I'll try to ignore that remark. My last 2 years was with the Asian Airlines out of Seoul, mostly to New York, and back and forth to Japan, carrying 500 people, big Boeing 747-400s. And maybe I shouldn't tell you this, but the pilots today over in that part of the world are discouraged from hand flying. They rely totally on the automatic systems. And the year I grew up in, we didn't like the introduction of automatic systems. And it's true that they're more efficient. An airline makes a little more money because it can be a little bit more accurate on the turn and your altitude and the speed and such. But it is a shame that the aviation is to a big degree, not to that degree in Canada, but pilots are losing the ability to do the hands and do what we did, because instruments are of no use when you're doing what we did.
What was the altitude you lost, Bob?
I said I don't know. Because there was no flight data recorder.
I don't know the measure, but we were told in the briefing afterwards it was 700 to 1,100 feet.
Oh, well, there you go.
Okay, I'm gonna say 850 feet.
I think this sounds more like the Bob and Clint comedy hour. No other questions. We're going to have a few draws, and we're going to wrap things up, because I know you probably all, it's getting late there, probably actually get going. So, do we have everything here for the draws?
Ask Clint a question.
Ask Clint a question.
So I can critique it.
It says ask Clint a question, so I can critique it. Oh my gosh. So your passes that you have, your tickets, those are the numbers, and we can do some draws here as soon as they come back.
Oh, that's good. He went to the back. Reading the voice.
Or you want to talk about it, please?
When we finally put something about this history on the seawall, and Bruce was an exhibitor in that mural on the seawall, and how people were coming from England, France, whatever, just to see a mural. Dave McNabb had done it. Dave McNabb was asked in Australia when he was showing somebody his phone where he lived in Gimli, and the person spotted the mural on his phone and said, why do you have that? That's a famous story. I know that story. This is Australia. And Dave said to the gentleman, I've painted it. So, anyway, Dave has given us permission. He has done a slightly different rendition of what's on the mural because I copyrighted it to the Gimli Art Club. So we've changed it slightly so we can get around that. And so we have two prints signed by Dave and Captain Pearson. And we're going to draw for two. Check the ticket stubs, please. Ticket 005. Ticket 077. 077.
Close? Is there? No.
Going what? Twice?
No.
Oh, is it yours? No.
No.
James, you've done so much for us. Oh, James.
Wait, I want to take one too. Yeah.
The aviation market is the Gimli Glider product. So, we have started to do a draw each year for a signed poster of the event, signed by Captain Pearson because of the nature of the collectibles that are out there. There's one gentleman here in the audience from China that brought a plane that I have not seen yet. Did you get a chance to look at it, Bob? It's a very different version of this plane, and it's a collector. So I haven't seen it yet, so it's something new that's out there. Ticket 046 for the large poster.
We have it.
Well, you would wait for safety. Yes. So,
Okay.
I'm electing.
Ticket 17, 017. This is a small poster. Ticket 80, 080. 080. Yeah, it's gotta be somebody who came through the door. 080? No? Going once, going twice?
Here.
Sorry?
Oh, we don't know where to.
Didn't ring it. Well, too bad.
Too bad, so sad. It's all good.
057. I'm just going to tell you over your, oh, the big one. A sign, teacher, by Bob Pearson. I Pearson. Just for a little side story, how this came to be. A few weeks after we were open, a lot of people that were trying the simulator that landed the plane would throw their arms up in the air and go, oh, I landed the Gimli Glider. So I phoned Bob and I said, I have a question for you. He said, yeah, what do you want? And I said, I want to make a t-shirt that says I landed the Gimli Glider. He said, I think that's a hell of a marketing idea. Go ahead and do it. Don't send me one. Okay.
But it's signed by
It's
Captain.
signed. It's signed. We don't do this very often. 070. 70.
Oh, yay! And it's gonna fit you, Terry.
This gentleman that won this t-shirt phoned me one night and he said, we had a special evening for those that have donated and made it possible for the glider to open. And he phoned me and he said, I hear you have theater seats for sale. That had happened because when the fellow that I chose in Chicago to buy these seats from us, they were red, Air Canada red and white. He said, who are they for? Who am I sending them to? I said, the Gimli Glider exhibit. That's the American way of life, double the price. So I said to Gwen, we have to have, what are we gonna do? I said, we're gonna auction them off to the donors that have already contributed. They were gone in an hour, one left. He heard about it, he phones me at midnight. Do not sell that seat. And I said, why? He said, all the air traffic controllers want it. So we have one seat, and all of them but one, Glenn Dodgko, sat in those seats. Glenn Ulrich that we're talking about here is the editor of the Senior Soul magazine. And he asked me if he could come tonight to do an article.
Well, thank you.
Closing remarks. Clint? All those phone calls to me where you were waiting for permission to tell your jokes, they went over really well. There were a couple of them I used. I asked him to speak because he said to me one day, I have a lot of respect for Bob. I didn't have that bag of tricks in my pocket, and I don't think any other pilot in the air did either. And that's what he called it, a bag of tricks, and I've never forgotten that. So he's a very interesting man. He also said about the Hall of Fame, if they don't do it this time, we're gonna riot. So,
Counting on you.
sorry? You're counting on me, yeah, well, they don't care to see my emails anymore when I see them. How do I explain to the public that I'm not in the Canadian Hall of Fame? Please don't. Okay, closing remarks. I've just had a request from somebody in the audience that said he'd like to come up here and, where are you, James? Please.
There's more than one James in the building?
No, he knows who he is. I have no idea what he's gonna say, but I know he's a big supporter of ours, so.
Thanks, Mark. Don't I need a microphone? The last thing you guys want to hear is another speech, so I'm going to make this really quick. I have orders from my wife. Oh, I'm not going to quiet. Before I left home today, and my wife couldn't make it, and she's a little upset about that. I had to bring another date, and he's nowhere as good looking as my wife. So I'm supposed to say hello to Captain Bob. But I also got another order from my wife. Apparently it's a fundraiser. And we in some small way have helped with the cockpit and a few other little things. So when I left the house, my wife said, you know, you like theatrics, you like to goof around and tease people. So I want you to pledge $5,000, but it has to be matching, which is how we bought the cockpit here. My wife and I pledged the money to bring the cockpit, we only pledged half of it. Barb and her crew, an amazing bunch of people. I think there's a prerequisite to be able to work with the Gimli Glider group. You have to be a phenomenal human being. You've demonstrated that, you all have, and I got the pleasure of meeting some of the other people when I got to see the cockpit. So, this is our challenge to you tonight. Talk to Peter, talk to Gwen, talk to Barb. Pledge whatever you can. My wife and I will match your money up to $5,000. So if you pledge $10, it costs me $10. If you don't like me, pledge $500. Anyway, Barb, thanks for all you've done. If it wasn't for you, it wouldn't be here.
Recreate that.
Thank you for that. Something.
All right, thanks everybody for coming tonight. It was a real joy to have you all here. And, Clipboard, your presentation was just enlightening.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. For our guests that were here tonight, thank you for coming. We really appreciate you being here. Have a safe travel home, and hopefully we'll see you again next year.